Volodymyr Zelenskyy has urged the UN to back a resolution condemning what he called energy terror. The Ukrainian president's plea came after Russia launched a new wave of rocket attacks against his country's beleaguered energy grid. Addressing the Security Council by video link, he said the attacks clearly constituted crimes against humanity. Ukrainian officials say the missile strikes killed at least 7 people and knocked out power across the country. Neighbouring Moldova was also affected by blackouts.
This latest Russian air assault was brutal, devastating and widespread. Little remains on this street in Vyshgorod, a town on the outskirts of Kyiv, which took a direct hit. Those who call this place home left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Some looking for pets left behind in the chaos of the shelling, while others try to clear away the debris amongst the ruins of a residential building. There's no electricity and no water, and no sign that Russia is going to stop anytime soon. Today was the scariest day. It was loud and terrifying. You could hear the strikes. So many victims, so many houses ruined. People have nowhere to live, nowhere to sleep. It's cold. I can't explain it. What for? We are all human beings. Around 70 missiles were launched by Russia this time around, wreaking more damage on Ukraine's already crippled energy system. Here in the capital, the city's mayor says at least 80% of residents have been left without power and water, and they are not alone. Cities right across Ukraine are dealing with blackouts and problems with water supplies. In the wake of the attack, Ukraine's president addressed the UN Security Council in New York, insisting it's time for the world to act. What Russia wants to achieve with such strikes should not cause confusion anywhere in the world. Energy terror is comparable to the use of weapons of mass destruction. When the temperature is below zero outside, and tens of millions of people are left without electricity, heat and water as a result of Russians' missiles hitting energy facilities. This is an obvious crime against humanity. President Zelenskyy says Ukrainian people are unbreakable and they will get through this war. But just how much more of this can they really take?
Well, as you heard, Kyiv is one of the places hit by those Russian missile attacks. Our correspondent Nick Connolly is there. Welcome, Nick. What's happening there now?
Well, good morning, Phil. You probably, if you can see behind me, there is not a lot of light on here in Kyiv this morning. Interesting enough, where I am, the power is back on. The traffic lights are working. But this was a very major attack. This was probably one of the most intense days in terms of attacks on Ukraine's energy system. We'd heard from the Ukrainian army that say that they were able to kind of hit about 51 of the 70 cruise missiles out of the sky that were launched against Ukraine. That still leaves more than a dozen hitting their targets. And it wasn't just electricity supplies that were affected. We also have heating plants that are so crucial for people living in high-rise apartments with no alternative way to heat their place, their apartments, their place of living or work. There is also the water issue, because obviously water depends on electric pumps, so most of Kyiv is still without water, and that's something that's repeated across the country. I think when you talk to Ukrainians, the thing that kind of most often is a problem for morale is mobile phone coverage. If people aren't able to make sure that their family, their friends are safe, if they aren't able to kind of work out the logistics of their day, that is something that cuts through more than power or heat. People can deal with a few days without electricity. People here are used to keeping power banks and making those preparations. That's a real issue, but for now it does seem like this time, like all the others, Ukrainian officials are doing pretty well at getting back to normal and getting some kind of schedule for rebuilding and restoring supplies. I think the question is, how long can Ukraine keep on doing this? Does it have the money? Does it have the supplies? There's lots of talk about Western allies promising a lot of money, promising supplies, and not always delivering in the timeframes needed. Yesterday there was a delegation here from 8 European countries talking about energy, and they happened to be here on a day where Russia hit Ukraine's energy supplies, spent a lot of time in an air raid bunker. And I had a chance to speak to Germany's State Minister for Europe about Germany's plans to help. Let's have a listen to what she had to say.
It's clear Putin wants Ukraine to sink into cold and darkness this winter. Ukrainians are facing up to all this with great bravery, and we're here to help them meet these challenges, not just with words, but also action. I'm here with an additional 55 million euros worth of support, including generators which will reach Ukraine in the next few days.
Well, Nick Connolly, Ukraine says Russia's trying to weaken morale and break Ukrainians' will with these missile strikes. Is that working?
I think for now it's actually having the opposite effect. We're seeing a lot of defiance. We're seeing people in parts of the country, sometimes hundreds of kilometres away from the front lines, really directly involved in this. There is basically no way here in Ukraine that you can really ignore this conflict, this war, even if you're not fighting yourself, even if you don't have family fighting. But this is something that is really making sure that all of Ukrainian society, wherever they may be, is kind of involved in this national effort. I think it's also kind of very counterproductive in terms of Russia's international kind of PR strategy. We're seeing lots of people around the world who maybe were zoning out of this conflict, paying less attention, seeing those images of civilians in the snow, without power, without heat, and it's really bringing that focus back on and also forcing Western governments to up their support for Ukraine. It is important, though, to stress, and this is something that Ukrainians often point out, that, kind of amazingly, the US has given more to Ukraine since the beginning of this war than all of Europe put together bilaterally and as the EU. The Europeans have only managed about 55% as much support as the Americans, even though this is directly, on their doorstep. So there's definitely a sense here in Ukraine that there is a lot more that Europe can do, and also just in terms of getting it here in time to really make a difference this winter. There's a lot of frustration here that there's a lot of bureaucratic delays, and that support is announced in front of the TV cameras but doesn't actually reach the people here in any kind of time frame that makes a difference. People trying to get through this winter and not have to leave their country while Russia is attacking them from the air. Lots of people have come back to Ukraine in recent months, but lots of people discussing on social media here whether maybe for people who can go, who don't have to be here, if maybe the best option would be to leave again, and sit this winter out somewhere in Western Europe.
Right. Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you.